Special Containment Procedures. All containment measures for SCP-7000 fall under the sole authority of the Emergent Threat Tactical Response Authority, ETRA. Standard Foundation personnel are expressly forbidden from direct engagement with SCP-7000 phenomena. Any probabilistic task with an index above 4.9 must not be attempted without explicit authorization from Overwatch Command. A rolling manifest of anomalous probability events is circulated daily through SCIP-Net. Consultation is mandatory prior to any experiment, deployment, or operational planning. Inimical class anomalies exacerbated by containment are to be decommissioned rather than preserved. Personnel with undeclared anomalous conditions who self-identify to ETRA receive temporary amnesty from termination or amnesticization, as undisclosed variables may critically destabilize countermeasures. Object Class: Keter. Provisional Thaumiel under ETRA review. Description: SCP-7000 is an ongoing probability failure event affecting Earth and, by extrapolation, the heliosphere. The anomaly manifests as progressive degradation of randomness into structured but nonsensical outcomes. Formerly predictable patterns, financial systems, atmospheric noise, biological heredity, and anomalous tropes become distorted. The effect is piecemeal. Some systems collapse into rigid determinism, while others fluctuate between absurd fortune and catastrophic failure. The phenomenon accelerates veil degradation worldwide and destabilizes normalcy maintenance. The root cause remains undetermined, though both ontokinetic interference and mechanical manipulation of fate, the so-called Kismet device of the Chaos Insurgency, have been proposed. SCP-7001, Dr. William Wallace Weddle, Site 43, Deputy Chair of Replication Studies, male, age 54. Weddle exhibits chronic negative probability absorption. He cannot experience positive chance outcomes, consistently fails at stochastic tasks, and attracts localized misfortune. Data collected over 2 decades demonstrates statistical impossibility of his failures under baseline conditions. Initial testing revealed that Weddle's presence absorbs the ambient SCP-7000 effect, rendering surrounding probability fields stable. At present, he is the only consistent anchor of probabilistic normalcy identified. His classification and whether SCP-7000 is contingent upon him is restricted to Level 4. General notes: SCP-7000 represents an LK-class twist of fate scenario, collapse of probability, and breakdown of causality. ETRA policy stresses containment by diversion, use of Weddle as a controlled attractor of failure, thereby permitting operational forces to succeed in otherwise impossible conditions. The risks are severe, as Weddle's function relies on his continued exposure to escalating misfortune, a role that may be physically or psychologically unsustainable. The first verifiable indication of SCP-7000 emerged on 7 July 2022, when Foundation web crawler I.O. Lorenz flagged anomalous behavior in random.org, an online generator reliant on atmospheric radio noise. Instead of random values, outputs displayed rigid sequential patterns, 1 through 10, 101 through 1000. Atmospheric monitoring confirmed that natural noise, formerly chaotic, had collapsed into predictable strings. This deviation suggested that chance itself was no longer functioning according to baseline statistical law. The anomaly's onset was global, but its effects appeared uneven and often nonsensical, spreading across domains without discernible logic. Reports from the same date detailed multiple improbable or impossible incidents. A Chaos Insurgency operative, guided by their predictive STEP compilation, was struck unconscious by a hailstone at the precise instant their mission required them to cross open ground. SCP-179, a heliospheric sentinel entity, exhibited visible confusion, signaling threats in directions unrelated to its astronomical function. In Yellowstone National Park, the geyser Old Faithful erupted every 13 minutes, deviating from its historically stable bimodal rhythm. Cryptocurrency markets collapsed entirely within hours, and multiple paratechnical financial groups reported catastrophic misalignments These converging anomalies exceeded coincidence, testifying to a widespread ontokinetic disruption. The Foundation declared an LK-class twist of fate scenario on 8th of July, assigning command to ETRA. Personnel across multiple sites reported operational breakdowns as containment routines failed under collapsing probability. Anomalous outcomes once rare or superstitiously associated with luck now manifested routinely. Shattered mirrors coinciding with grievous accidents, black cats altering deployment trajectories, and trivial items assuming world-threatening significance. The veil began to fracture as civilian observers noted the absurd scale of coincidences. Amid this chaos, Site 43 reported an unusual self-disclosure. Dr. William Wallace Weddle, a career researcher notorious for incompetence and perpetual mishap, presented himself to ETRA interviewers. Initially dismissed as a hypochondriac, Weddle insisted he suffered from a lifelong anomalous state, absolute misfortune. Demonstrating his condition through coin tosses and number guessing, he consistently failed with statistical impossibility. Records he maintained over decades confirmed his claims. Unlike the rest of the world, Weddle's anomaly had not shifted. His failures remained absolute, unaffected by SCP-7000's distortions. Investigators began to suspect a link. While global probability collapsed into chaos, Weddle's misfortune persisted with iron consistency. Interviews with colleagues and former associates reinforced the impression. His presence coincided with improbable accidents, ruined events, and cascading failures localized around him, yet broader systems seemed to stabilize in his orbit. Analytics cross-referenced accident logs and discovered that Site 43, Weddle's longtime posting, had experienced fewer catastrophic outcomes than statistical baselines predicted. It was not luck that Site 43 thrived on, but Weddle's inverse absorption of misfortune. From this discovery, the hypothesis arose: SCP-7000 was not merely random collapse, but a redistribution of probability. While the world spiraled into illogical chance, Weddle functioned as an anchor, a sinkhole drawing in the worst outcomes. His anomaly, once dismissed as incompetence, became the most stable pattern left on Earth. Foundation Command escalated his designation, marking him SCP-7001, and began considering weaponizing his misfortune for containment operations. The irony was not lost on observers. In a universe unraveling under chaos, survival might depend on the most consistently unlucky man alive. SCP-7000's nature became clearer only after ETRA conducted structured analysis of Weddle's anomaly. Field tests confirmed that his presence dampened the chaos of surrounding probability. Coin flips, dice rolls, even critical containment procedures proceeded without SCP-7000 interference, provided Weddle remained within the operational radius. Yet for him personally, outcomes remained consistently disastrous. His attempts to walk, speak, or even breathe without incident resulted in an endless catalog of minor failures, from choking on dust motes to tripping over flat floors. The working description filed within ETRA records classified SCP-7000 as a progressive breakdown of chance itself. Randomness collapsing into deterministic absurdity, structured but irrational outcomes eroding the fabric of consensus reality. Entire systems behaved as if fate had been forcibly rewritten. Weather formations assembled in shapes recognizable as omens. Statistical impossibilities, once the province of anomaly reports, became commonplace. Every probability curve bent sharply away from expectation, undermining science, containment, and secrecy. Dr. Weddle's anomaly, redesignated SCP-7001, was cataloged as a negative probability sink. He did not generate chaos, but absorbed it. Every bad outcome that might scatter across the environment seemed to converge on him, leaving those around him shielded by his perpetual misfortune. Site 43's improbably consistent survival, through years of containment breaches, was retroactively attributed to Weddle's presence. What once had been a joke among staff, a man cursed to fail at every trivial task, was now recognized as the only stable statistical anchor remaining in a collapsing world. SCP-7000's broader manifestations spread far beyond simple chance. Biological processes mutated toward absurdity. Chickens developed hereditary teeth, cats were born with unnatural numbers of toes, and heritable anomalies that should have been impossible surged through natural populations. Social systems warped. Auction markets reported every item as genuinely rare, and folklore superstitions, once harmless, now produced measurable consequences. Even anomalous nexuses tied to narrative logic ceased to function as expected, their protective tropes and story-like causality unraveling into mediocrity. This raised profound ontological concerns within the Foundation. If probability could no longer serve as the substrate of science, then the Foundation's core mission, predicting, containing, controlling, was itself under siege. Every calculation, every safeguard, every plan risked collapse under the weight of an impossible outcome. In this environment, Weddle's anomaly was paradoxically invaluable. His failures were predictable, his misery reliable. Descriptions of SCP-7000 in ETRA reports often wavered between clinical analysis and outright desperation. Probability was no longer merely an abstract force, it had become a weaponized anomaly. The only certainty left was that one man could not succeed at anything he attempted, and in that absolute certainty lay the possibility of control. The human consequences of SCP-7000's spread became impossible to ignore within days. Personnel across dozens of sites reported psychological breakdowns as the distinction between misfortune and impossibility eroded. A research assistant at Site 19, after slipping 5 times in succession on dry tile, had to be sedated for hysteria. Civilian witnesses, unshielded by Foundation conditioning, began attributing the wave of improbable disasters to curses, omens, and divine punishment. Entire communities spiraled into paranoia when simple actions, walking across the street, preparing a meal, turning on a light, resulted in cascading accidents. Medical logs compiled by Site 43 revealed a distinct pattern. Individuals who spent extended time near Dr. Weddle experienced diminished misfortune. Their accident rates dropped, their routines stabilized, and their psychological profiles showed less stress despite global turmoil. Conversely, Weddle's personal condition deteriorated. His accident frequency increased, ranging from stubbed toes and broken bones to sustained injuries during even trivial movements. Observers noted that his presence at Site 43 was often the dividing line between orderly function and complete collapse. Interviews with Weddle painted a portrait of a man ground down by a lifetime of failure. He spoke of endless cycles of humiliation, never winning a coin toss, never succeeding in trivial gambles, forever undermined by chance itself. What once had seemed pathetic now revealed itself as a psychic burden of immense weight. He confessed that every decision he made felt cursed, that even when trying to aid others, he merely shifted disaster onto himself. Colleagues described him as bitter, fatalistic, yet also meticulous. He had logged decades of failed coin flips, dice rolls, and random selections, perhaps subconsciously building the only longitudinal record capable of proving his condition real. Psychologists drafted to evaluate his anomaly struggled to separate pathology from anomaly. Weddle displayed classic symptoms of learned helplessness, withdrawal, pessimism, resignation. Yet unlike typical cases, his despair was justified. Every test confirmed his failures were genuine. In a world collapsing into nonsense, he alone was consistent, an unbroken chain of wrong outcomes. The irony was cruel. The man most punished by fate had become the Foundation's best weapon against its dissolution. The effect on those around him was equally profound. Subordinates confessed to unease when assigned to his division, but also relief that their accidents diminished in his presence. Some admitted to superstitious rituals of their own, designed to offload their bad luck onto him. Though the Foundation discouraged such practices, logs confirmed they often worked. Weddle, meanwhile, internalized this burden. He began framing his suffering as a necessary sacrifice, his misery shielding others. Doctors warned of the psychological toll. They predicted eventual collapse under the weight of guilt and exhaustion. But the Foundation could not afford to release him. He had become both subject and shield, a man weaponized against probability itself. And as SCP-7000 deepened, the question shifted from whether he could endure to how long the world could survive if he failed. Formal experimentation began once ETRA secured Weddle as a controlled variable. Initial protocols focused on simple demonstrations, dice rolls, coin flips, and card draws performed within his vicinity. In every trial, Weddle failed to predict or influence outcomes, yet the chaos that plagued all other probability-driven systems ceased in his immediate range. Dice rolled true, cards shuffled evenly, machines reliant on random number generation behaved within statistical norms. The conclusion was inescapable. Weddle acted as a stabilizer, drawing all negative possibility into himself, allowing the environment to reassert baseline probability. Attempts to expand testing quickly revealed limitations. When Weddle engaged directly with experiments, the results turned catastrophic. An effort to replicate basic thaumaturgical rituals faltered when candles refused to light, chalk circles broke under their own weight, and the researcher conducting the trial suffered a concussion after slipping on Weddle's discarded pencil. Conversely, when Weddle remained a passive observer, surrounding staff reported smooth, uneventful procedures. His active participation drew disaster. His presence alone ensured success. ETRA escalated trials to operational simulations. Mobile task force units rehearsed high-risk containment drills, with Weddle included. Time after time, drills that had failed under SCP-7000 conditions proceeded flawlessly when he was present, except for the endless string of injuries and mishaps inflicted upon him. On one occasion, a full mock containment of a Class V Keter entity unfolded without error, while Weddle simultaneously dislocated both shoulders, attempting to buckle his safety harness. Analysts concluded that his utility was maximal when integrated as a passive anchor, minimal when granted tasks. Neutralization experiments were proposed, but consistently vetoed. Terminating Weddle risked removing the only stable countermeasure to SCP-7000, and attempts at temporary separation proved equally disastrous. When Weddle was relocated to an isolation wing, the site suffered an immediate cascade of failures, power surges, data corruption, and a laboratory fire. The anomalies ceased only when Weddle was returned to his post, limping and half-conscious after falling down 2 flights of stairs during the transfer. One of the more controversial procedures involved measuring his effect radius. Teams equipped with synchronized chronometers and probability stress sensors recorded a stabilization bubble of approximately 30 meters in diameter around Weddle. Beyond this sphere, SCP-7000 resumed unchecked, twisting outcomes at random. Within it, Foundation staff reported a disquieting mix of relief and guilt. Relief at their safety, guilt at the visible suffering of their anchor. Notes describe him bleeding from minor cuts, bruised, hunched, yet surrounded by colleagues working with unusual ease. Every failed test reinforced the same paradox. The Foundation could not solve SCP-7000 without exploiting Weddle's endless misfortune. He had become the fulcrum of their strategy, a man whose existence was a controlled disaster. The experiments proved his stabilizing effect beyond question, but also revealed the cost. The more the world leaned on him, the closer he edged toward breaking. Internal records soon filled with fragments that blurred the line between official documentation and personal testimony. Surveillance logs, intercepted messages, and recovered diary entries painted a fractured mosaic of the anomaly's human dimension. Weddle's file, once a footnote in replication studies, expanded into a labyrinth of addenda and redactions, each documenting the absurd intersection of his life with a world collapsing under probability's failure. One transcript from an informal debriefing showed Weddle trying to explain his condition to a junior researcher. He insisted he had replication data on himself, a meticulous archive of decades of failed coin tosses and botched guesses. When pressed, he produced pages of handwritten records, every attempt, every failure, each marked with bitter humor. The junior researcher described the site as like staring at proof that reality itself holds a grudge. The transcript ends with Weddle muttering that the only constant is that the joke's always on me. Recovered correspondence from his ex-wife provided another layer. In one letter, confiscated during background vetting, she described their marriage as a long chain of accidents waiting to happen. She recounted ruined holidays, lost jobs, and a crash that nearly cost her life. It's not that he wanted things to go wrong, she wrote. It's that they always did. Living with him was like living in the eye of a storm that never ends. The letter closed with a note of pity. If the Foundation thinks they can use him, they'd better understand they're feeding themselves on his misery. Site 43's accident logs corroborated these accounts. Weeks where Weddle filed the reports personally showed fewer anomalies, fewer malfunctions, and fewer near-fatal mistakes among staff. Yet the logs also contained anomalies of their own: ink smudges, torn pages, even entire entries erased by spilled coffee or unexplained fire damage. The accidents seemed to follow him into the paperwork, leaving behind evidence as clumsy and stubborn as the man himself. Other addenda emerged through intercepted communications. A call from a Chaos insurgency operative, captured mid-transmission, revealed their awareness of Weddle. "They've found a sink," the voice muttered. "One man eating all the bad roles. If they're smart, they'll chain him to their side. If we're smart, we'll break the chain." The recording ended with static, followed by a burst of numbers later identified as coordinates to a failed insurgency raid. Among the most unsettling artifacts were fragments of Weddle's own video recordings, discovered after one of his brief desertions. In grainy footage, he spoke directly into the camera. Replication studies prove what's true. So why is this still happening? Haven't I given enough proof already? His glasses slipped down his face, and he laughed bitterly. Maybe proof doesn't matter. Maybe the point is to keep proving it, over and over, until I'm too tired to try again. The recording ended abruptly when he dropped the device and stepped on it. Together, these documents painted a picture not only of an anomaly, but of a man drowning in it. Each fragment, testimony, letter, log, or tape, carried the same undertone. Weddle's suffering was both the mechanism of stability and the raw evidence of a universe tearing itself apart. The deeper Etra dug, the more the Foundation itself began to fracture under the strain of SCP-7000. The central dispute centered on Weddle's role. Was he a stabilizing anchor or a sacrificial scapegoat? Analysts in the Department of Analytics presented clear statistical evidence that Site-43's improbable fortune was tethered to his presence, while Ethics Committee liaisons argued that exploiting a human being as a probability sink constituted systemic abuse. The debate spilled into closed-door meetings, redacted memos, and veiled threats between departments. Leaked transcripts revealed the bitterness of these arguments. In one session, a senior ETRA director snapped at an ethics liaison. "If you want to preserve morality, then preserve reality first. Without Weddle, you won't have either." The liaison's reply, redacted in official files but reconstructed from audio backups, accused the Foundation of treating Weddle as a disposable talisman, not a human being. O5 representatives remained silent, their silence interpreted alternately as tacit approval or calculated denial. Censorship became routine. Reports highlighting Weddle's psychological decline were quietly removed from SIPNet archives, replaced by summaries emphasizing operational success. Incident logs documenting his injuries were sanitized, downplaying repeated fractures, concussions, and nervous breakdowns. Staff who raised objections found themselves reassigned to remote postings or buried under bureaucratic silos of meaningless paperwork. The internal message was clear. Weddle's suffering was classified not as a problem, but as a resource. Whispers circulated that certain divisions saw an opportunity to expand his use. If Weddle could stabilize probability in localized operations, why not scale it up? Proposals surfaced for binding him to containment reactors, embedding his anomaly into thaumaturgical engines, or even cloning him to replicate the effect across multiple sites. Each suggestion was officially marked speculative, but survived in working drafts, suggesting someone was pushing the agenda forward. Among the rank and file, discontent simmered. Rumors spread that Weddle was being deliberately humiliated to maximize his effect, his suffering cultivated as if it were fertilizer. Researchers quietly warned new staff never to laugh at his misfortunes. It was no longer just cruel, but dangerous, as if mockery itself encouraged the anomaly to persist. A covert note found in Site 43's break room summed it up in shaky handwriting. "We're living off his misery. What happens when he breaks?" The cover-ups became self-defeating. Every attempt to erase Weddle's humanity from the record only emphasized how indispensable he had become. For the first time in decades, the Foundation found itself reliant not on technological supremacy, nor esoteric rituals, nor brute force, but on the quiet, ceaseless suffering of one man. It was an irony so unbearable that few dared to speak it aloud. The greatest weapon against the collapse of fate was not courage, brilliance, or sacrifice, but the unending humiliation of someone who never asked to be special at all. The inevitable escalation came during a mission codenamed Operation Black Swan, the first full deployment of Weddle as a field stabilizer. MTF Theta 7000, hand-picked operatives hardened by years of combat, entered a chaos insurgency firebase under collapsing probability conditions. Without Weddle, projections estimated a 90% chance of catastrophic failure. With him, the operation succeeded. But the transcripts tell a different story. Every moment was punctuated by Weddle's disasters, his body and dignity offered up as the price of the team's improbable survival. Helmet recordings documented him twisting both ankles, collapsing ceilings onto himself, and swallowing his own comms microphone in a fit of panic. Each blunder diverted disaster from his squad. Insurgent traps failed to trigger, ambushes dissolved into confusion, and explosives misfired at the exact moment his presence drew chaos into himself. By the end, the firebase was captured with minimal casualties, but Weddle was carried out with a shattered collarbone, multiple contusions, and a vacant stare that suggested something worse than physical pain: resignation. Subsequent missions followed the same grim pattern. At a free port, a thermonuclear device failed to detonate only after Weddle, half asleep on a cot, inhaled flies until he choked. In Australia, SCP-682's rampage during a music festival was concealed from civilians when attention shifted to Weddle's slapstick altercation with a kangaroo that kicked him into a burning grill. Public laughter became the Foundation's camouflage, while Weddle's humiliation deepened into despair. The culmination of these patterns came when Weddle abandoned his post. After his 68th deployment, he fled Site 43, leaving behind a recorded message. Replication studies prove what's true. Why am I still here, proving it again and again? Haven't I given enough? He rambled about lobotomies, about the absurdity of being a clown for the universe, about a lifetime of pain that had become weaponized. His flight was brief. He was recaptured within hours, undone not by Foundation pursuit, but by his own incompetence in failing to disable his phone's tracking. This desertion sent shockwaves through ETRA and the O5 Council. Some argued it was proof he was unstable and no longer reliable. Others insisted it confirmed his indispensability. If the anomaly had not consumed him yet, it meant he was still absorbing the world's chaos. Field logs after his absence showed immediate surges of catastrophic anomalies, lending weight to the latter view. He was reinstated under tighter supervision, but the cracks in his resolve were undeniable. Witnesses described him as hollowed out, his voice stripped of humor, his eyes dulled. Reports suggested that while the world still needed him, he no longer believed in himself as anything but a tool. The Foundation's greatest irony had hardened into tragedy. The man who absorbed chaos could no longer withstand the order imposed upon him. The final incident was no longer a matter of if, but when, and whether humanity would survive the breaking of its most unwilling savior. The final crisis unfolded without warning. Probability distortions reached their zenith, spilling into every layer of human life. Entire cities reported synchronized anomalies, streetlights blinking in prime number intervals, hospital patients waking en masse at identical times, and aircraft grounded by birds forming letters in the sky. Veil protocols collapsed under the sheer absurdity, as civilians demanded explanations for patterns that could not be dismissed as coincidence. The Foundation faced the unthinkable, exposure not from one anomaly, but from the collapse of chance itself. ETRA authorized an unprecedented measure, direct tethering of Weddle to a probability modulation array, a desperate attempt to extend his stabilizing field across a continental scale. Technical staff resisted, warning that no human could withstand such pressure, but the order carried O5 authorization, stamped with urgency and redaction. Weddle, bruised and limping, was escorted into the array chamber. Witnesses later described his expression as one of exhausted inevitability, a man long since resigned to suffering as his only contribution. For 72 hours, the system functioned. SCP-7000's influence abated, markets stabilized, weather patterns normalized, and containment protocols across multiple sites held for the first time in weeks. But the burden on Weddle was immense. Medical monitors showed his body racked with convulsions, his heart racing erratically, his brain activity fluctuating between overload and near flatline. The reports were heavily censored, but one surviving note from a technician read, "He's failing, and if he goes, we all go with him." The collapse came during the third day. Weddle lost consciousness, probability surged back in waves, and the array itself imploded under contradictory outcomes. In the aftermath, entire regions experienced simultaneous disasters. Dam bursts where there was no rain, forest fires igniting during snowfall, and laboratories reporting strings of experiments that all returned identical, meaningless results. Yet in the wreckage, something remarkable was noted: localized bubbles where probability had not fully collapsed. These regions coincided with areas Weddle had physically occupied in the past, as if traces of his misfortune lingered behind him, like scars across reality. O5 Command reclassified SCP-7000 as Keter Thaumiel, its containment status officially ongoing and unresolved. Weddle was designated missing in action. Some files list him as deceased, others as operationally absent. Rumors persist among staff that he lingers in the system, half absorbed by the array, existing now only as a statistical shadow. Field agents occasionally report improbable stability in the most unlikely of circumstances and whisper that it means Weddle is still there, somewhere, quietly failing so that others may succeed. The resolution was no resolution at all, only a grim accommodation. SCP-7000 remains active, its distortions worsening, its true cause never found. The Foundation's official line declares that probability is fractured but containable, a manageable crisis. Off the record, researchers admit the truth. Humanity's survival may depend on the lingering echo of one man's suffering. In a universe where certainty has crumbled, the only constant left is the inevitability of William Wallace Weddle's failure, and the fragile hope that it will be enough to hold the world together a little longer.